So today we are hopping into the back half of the book of Daniel. And as Nick announced whenever y'all walked in the room, the back half of the book does in many ways feel how I imagine an acid trip would kind of feel. Because it's a very, very strange part. It's one of the strangest sections in the Bible as a whole. And so let me just bring my outline up here again. Because, like we pointed out, the first 6 chapters of the book of Daniel are mainly stories about Daniel and his friends. The back 6 chapters are visions that Daniel himself has. So, thus far in the story, we have... what reputation does Daniel have amongst the Babylonians and Persians?
He's like the head magician and seer.
Yeah, so he has a reputation of being really good at interpreting things, right? And so he's interpreting writing on the wall. He's interpreting visions. He's interpreting dreams. But so far, we haven't seen any dreams that he himself has had, right? Everything he's been doing so far is he has been interpreting other people's dreams, other people's visions, other people's problems, right? That's what Daniel's been doing. But going into the back half of this book, we are going to all of a sudden get to zoom in into Daniel's personal experiences. And the back 6 chapters are in many ways almost like Daniel's private journals, to where he's sharing stuff that he himself saw. And if anything, it will elevate our understanding of who this guy is, because when you read the first 6 chapters, you're already left with the impression that this guy is really something special, right? I mean, he has this reputation amongst the people as being like the best of the best, to the degree that what we saw in last week's chapter is that there's literally a group of other counselors and stuff who conspired against him to have him killed just because they were jealous of him. And so Daniel has a reputation of being this brilliant guy, and it describes him as being one in whom the spirit of the gods was like dwelling, right? And so going into this back half of the book, we're going to see that come to the forefront again. And really the back 6 chapters are broken down into 4 different visions, right? Chapter 7 is one vision, chapter 8 is another vision, chapter 9 is a third vision, and then chapters 10, 11, and 12 are one big final vision that will wrap the whole book up. And another thing we pointed out is that the book is unique because it is one of only 2 books in the Bible that is written in 2 different languages, right? The book of Daniel is written in both Hebrew and Aramaic. And Aramaic and Hebrew are very close stuff. Like they're very close languages. It's kind of like if you were to compare like Spanish and Italian or French, like that. They're to where if you're a native Hebrew speaker and you're reading Aramaic, you're going to have a tough time, but you'll be able to probably piece together what's going on. But the reason why is because the Hebrew language is the language of the Jewish people, but the Aramaic language is the language of the Babylonians. And so the general consensus is that chapters 2 through 7 are primarily directed not necessarily at just the Jewish people, but to all people, and specifically the Babylonians and beyond. And so that's what makes this chapter in particular so unique, because this is the only chapter in the book that belongs in the vision section, yet it is written in Aramaic, right? And so whenever we go to chapters 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12, it seems like whatever the message Daniel has in those chapters, it seems like the message is mainly directed towards the Jewish people. But this vision is direct, like, it is a personal vision Daniel receives, but it in some way is speaking to something that's way bigger than just the Jewish people, right? It is going to be about the entire world, and it's going to have some sort of commentary about that. And for that reason, I've had a circle around this chapter since we started the book, because I pointed out how just whenever you're looking at the structure of the book, you can tell that something's going on in this chapter that should draw our particular attention. And as we're going to see, there is a verse in this chapter, or a few verses, that are actually some of the most quoted verses in the entire New Testament. Like in the New Testament, the early Christians are going to quote these verses time and time again. Hey, Yuppie! We're in Bible study. You don't have to play with your toys. And so, that's where we're at right now. So I'm really excited for this section, but I do want to offer a word of caution. Because whenever as humans in general, we have this tendency to really like conspiracy stuff, right? Like that's just how our minds are wired, and we love trying to predict things. And whenever you get into apocalyptic prophecies like you see in the book of Daniel, Christianity, and just Christians in general, we have a track record of mishandling these things and just getting weird and kooky about it. And there are some Christians who, because other Christians have handled it so poorly, they actually just avoid passages like this altogether. Because they're like, you know what? People have handled it poorly in the past. Let's just ignore it and let's just focus on loving one another. Right? I don't think that's the proper way to respond to this, because God put this stuff in Scripture for a reason. And so I think we should study it. But our goal always has to we need to push past just the predictive stuff and figure out what the message is behind it, right? Because God is not simply telling this stuff to Daniel just so that, it's not some like Nostradamus type prophecy where he's just guessing the future just to pull off a cool magic trick, right? There's a purpose behind the message, and it's our job as readers of Scripture and as followers of God to try to figure out what the message is, okay? And so we're going to study this, but we're going to try our best to not be conspiratorial about it. There might be some speculation involved, but we're going to try to handle it well. And if we ever go too far, I'm going to try to rein us back in to focus on the text. Sound good? And so in the Aramaic section, we've talked about how there's this chiastic structure to where the first and last chapter in the Aramaic section, they do have these parallels, right? To where back in chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar had this dream that featured one statue made of 4 metals, and then part of it was made of clay. It does seem like that dream is directly parallel to the dream that Daniel's going to have in today's chapter. And so whenever we read today's chapter, we always have to read it in light of what we saw in chapter 2. So we're going to be referencing that chapter a lot today. And then whenever you go down, you see it just kind of works its way down to the very end of chapter 4, to where you have 2 miraculous deliverances. You got Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace in chapter 3, and then you have Daniel in the lion's den in chapter 6. And then in chapters 4 and 5, you have the humbling of a proud king. Nebuchadnezzar is successfully humbled, and therefore he praises God, whereas Belshazzar, he does not get humbled, and instead he is killed. Right? And so the very center of the chiasm and the central part of that whole section has been Nebuchadnezzar praising the God of Israel, which is just a really cool thing. And then again, here's the timeline that we're dealing with. This is just a timeline that starts well before the destruction of Jerusalem and then ends after they begin to return. And one thing I want to highlight for today's chapter is, I've got it circled down there in red. You'll notice that what empire is still ruling at the time period that this chapter takes place? Babylon. What does that tell us about this chapter when compared to the last one?
Well, the Medo-Persians have come,
Yeah, so whenever we were in... Yuppie. Chill. So at the end of chapter 5, if you remember, there was the handwriting on the wall, and then Belshazzar was destroyed. Yuppie. Chill. You're not tough. So the Babylonians were destroyed at the end of chapter 5. And then going into chapter 6, we were into the midst of the Medo-Persian Empire. Right? But this chapter is going to rewind a little bit, and we're going earlier. And the main reason that is because we're in a different section of the book now, right? So it's not working strictly chronologically. It's going backward. And so the vision that we're going to see in today's chapter is something that Daniel actually received years and years and years before he actually went into the lion's den. So, make sense?
And we're assuming this is something that was probably intended for the Babylonians.
Well, yeah, so it's being written in Aramaic, so we would assume that there is this general application that is meant to be understood by all people in general. And the fact that it was given to him during the Babylonian Empire is going to be relevant to our interpretation of the passage. And so, that being said, at long last, let's hop into the text itself. Get ready, because it's going to get weird. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream and visions in his head as he lay on his bed. Then he wrote the dream down and said the following summary of the matter. Daniel answered and said, I was looking in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea, and 4 great beasts were coming up from the sea, different from one another. The first was like a lion and had the wings of an eagle. I kept looking until its wings were plucked, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and a heart of a man was given to it. And behold, another beast, a second one, in the likeness of a bear. And it was raised up on one side, and 3 ribs were in its mouth between its teeth. And thus they said to it, Arise, devour much meat. After this I kept looking, And behold, another one, like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, fearsome and terrifying and extraordinarily strong. And it had large iron teeth. It devoured and crushed and trampled down the remainder with its feet. And it was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. While I was contemplating the horns, behold, another horn, a little one, came up among them, and 3 of the first horns were pulled out by the roots before it. And behold, this horn possessed eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great boasts. All right, so there is the beginning of the dream. What do y'all think? And for right now, let's not try to interpret it. Let's just describe it. So what's going on here?
It's a lot to.
It's very strange creatures.
A lot going on.
Very strange creatures, that's for sure.
I'm gonna have to go through it a little slower.
Lord's doing some supernatural gene splicing.
Uh-huh. That's what it sounds like. Yeah, so Daniel has a vision, and what does he see in the vision?
Okay, I'm gonna focus on the first. There are 4 great beasts. I'm gonna focus on the first one for the time being.
Yeah, well, we're going to walk through them all individually. But just summarizing big picture. You don't need to go through each one individually. What does he see?
Basically just sees 4 beasts, each with differing qualities about them, but with the same underlying, like, predatory nature. Like, none of them are represented by, like, animals you would think of as docile.
Yeah.
They're all, great beasts of the wilderness that prey on others. And each one, like I said, has its own different characteristics. And it seems like as they're going from one beast to the next, they're getting more and more terrifying.
Yeah, they're getting more, like, perverse and twisted and, like, almost unreal. Like, ironically, they're almost getting more beast-like.
Yes.
Right? To where, like, the first one at least sounds like, it just sounds like a combination of 2 animals. And then, like, just as it keeps going, it's like, it almost gets, it goes, like, into, like, almost mythological stuff. Where it's really, all of them sound like mythological creatures. But yeah, so there's something very strange going on here. And, spoiler alert for later on in the chapter, it is going to be clearly told to Daniel that these represent 4 kingdoms. And that's why we would associate this with Daniel chapter 2. Because if you remember, Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, and what was his dream?
It was a dream of a statue rising up in the ground with 4 different metals that represented 4 kingdoms that were and were to come. And then the statue gets shattered by a pebble that's thrown at its feet, which grows into a mountain that represents the kingdom of God.
Yeah, and so basically in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, he sees this one unified statue, but it's broken into like it's composed of 4 separate elements, right? And so you've got the head of gold, and then you've got the chest and the arms are made of silver, and then you've got like the torso is made of bronze, and then you've got the legs which are made of iron, but then down at the feet there's a mixture of iron and clay. And Daniel interprets this as referring to 4 kingdoms, the first of which is Babylon, right? To where he very clearly says that the gold head represents Nebuchadnezzar and his kingdom. And so that would be the Babylonian Empire, and Nebuchadnezzar is like the chief amongst the kings. And so we would read this in light of that, to where it does seem like these are 2 parallel things. But what's interesting is that in Daniel chapter 2, whenever Daniel interpreted that, he didn't really seem shocked by any of it, right? If you remember, the whole point of, like, in Daniel chapter 2 is that Nebuchadnezzar, he was terrified by the dream because you kind of get the idea that he understood what it was about, and he recognized that he was the head of gold, and so he woke up from the dream because he's like, oh my gosh, like, the statue got destroyed. And so he's freaking out, and he charges people, like, he says, okay, I want to know the interpretation of the dream, but he doesn't want people to make anything up, so he says, it's like, I'm not going to tell you what the dream was, you have to tell me what the dream was and interpret it for me, right? Because he doesn't want anybody just telling him a favorable interpretation. Mm-hmm. And so Daniel shows up, and he is able to accurately describe the dream and give its interpretation. And to Daniel, this just seems very straightforward. Whereas, as we're going to see in this chapter, even though there is a parallel, Daniel's response to this dream is very different. to where Daniel himself is going to be shaken up by what he sees. And he's going to be absolutely terrified.
Okay, maybe this. The way I kind of interpret this, right, it's maybe the progression of the perverseness of mankind, or the perverseness of the kingdom of Babylon.
I think that is going to be an element of it.
Because we're starting relatively calm, mythological creature, and the abominations just keep getting worse and worse and worse.
Yeah, you know you're in trouble when the lion is the calmest one.
Yeah. Yeah, to where as it goes, there is this progression where it is getting worse. But then it's going to get better at the very end, which is cool. But yeah, so let's just walk through it. So, in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon. All right, who's Belshazzar? We've talked about him before. Not to be confused with Belteshazzar. Who's Belteshazzar?
Daniel.
That's Daniel, right? That's his Babylonian name. Who is Belshazzar?
He is essentially second in command. We talked about how the king of Babylon at this time, I believe, is off somewhere in Saudi Arabia, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So he's essentially a co-ruler, and I actually find it interesting. I was reading about how the Romans operated during the Roman Empire. They actually had a system that's a lot like how Belshazzar and his father ruled, where when there was an emperor, they had the title of Augustus, and then their co-ruler would sort of act as like their second in command, and that was the Caesar. So you have Belshazzar's father, who is essentially the actual king, but he's off, seeing to the stuff that's outside of Babylon. And then Belshazzar is ruling in Babylon as like a secondary king, essentially.
Yeah, and so to the people of Babylon, he is the king, but technically by title, his dad is the king. But since Daniel's writing from Babylon, and he lived in Babylon the whole time, he refers to Belshazzar as the king. But yeah, so the main thing I was wanting to get across is that we saw Belshazzar die back in chapter 5. But now we're rewinding, and we're going back to the first year of Belshazzar. Right? And so we're going back in time. The Babylonian Empire is still in charge here. And it says that Daniel saw a dream. I talked about how one thing that's also going to be interesting here is that this is the last chapter where we have any third person stuff, but it's going to shift into first person during this chapter. So he has a dream, and he saw visions in his head as he lay on his bed. Right? And so some people might be tempted to conclude that maybe he just had some weird pizza and just had a weird dream. But it's very clear to Daniel that this is a supernatural dream that is given to him by God. And that's because he's going to interact with an angel who's going to explain things to him. And at this point, we've seen enough about Daniel to know that he can differentiate between what's divine and what's not. So he wrote the dream down, and he said the following summary of the matter. So this is ultimately what he provides with us. Daniel answered and said, I was looking in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. Alright, so how does the dream start?
Basically, all the winds of heaven start stirring up the Mediterranean.
Yeah, so the Great Sea is a reference to the Mediterranean Sea. And so...
So it seems like, more than likely, this dream is almost like Daniel's placing himself on the sea.
Yes.
And then he's like looking out and the winds are like swirling and it's like a storm is brewing in the sea.
Yes. And now, question, because I think this is going to help us interpret the passage. Where else in Scripture do we see a story that begins with chaotic waters and wind going over it?
Jesus in the boat with the disciples.
I'm thinking far earlier.
Genesis?
Genesis chapter 1.
Oh.
Right?
Okay.
Yeah, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and the earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. And then it says, and the Spirit of God passed over the waters. But the literal word is, the word for spirit is the Hebrew word ruach, and it just means wind. Right? And so it's literally the wind of God passed over the face of the waters. And then, God says, let there be light, and there's light, and then God begins to separate things, and he takes chaos and brings it into order. Right? And so, in many ways, I think that we're supposed to interpret this dream in light of the creation story. Right? It's almost like Daniel is seeing a metaphorical new creation. To where, in the dream, he opens his eyes, and he's out in the middle of the Great Sea. Right? It's the Mediterranean. and it says that these four winds came in. When it says the four winds, what's it referring to?
North, south, east, west.
Yeah, north, south, east, and west, right? So from all directions, the wind, like, you can almost imagine almost like a vortex, right? It's like, it's blowing from all directions, right? And it's stirring up the waters. And so you're wondering what's going to come out of this, right? Because it sounds very chaotic. It's not just the Spirit of God passing over the waters in an orderly manner. It's all four winds stirring things up.
I do think that the fact that I had never, until we started going it through it verse by verse, I had never realized that this dream was taking place on the Mediterranean, and I think that helps inform some of the things that we can draw from.
Okay.
Given how each of the four beasts represents the four kingdoms, and it's likely that all four kingdoms have to do with something with the Mediterranean.
Oh, maybe. Yeah,
Around it.
I can see that. And so, four great beasts were coming up from the sea, different from one another. And so as the waters are being stirred up, he just sees these beasts rising up. And the beasts are going to represent something. The first was like a lion, and it had the wings of an eagle. I kept looking until its wings were plucked, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and a heart of a man was given to it.
Which is essentially a reversal of what happened in Nebuchadnezzar.
Is it? Oh, okay.
So when we're talking about the moment when Nebuchadnezzar is humbled, it's basically when he's at his proudest moment. And
So this is Daniel chapter 4.
yes, earlier in Daniel chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar has this dream where he's basically like a beast in the field, and Daniel warns him that it will be essentially an act of humbling for him, so that when he's at his most prideful and his most boastful, he will be reduced to like that of a beast. Fast forward a year, Nebuchadnezzar is walking along the rooftops of his kingdom, and he says, Babylon, oh, how great are you?
Yeah, he's like, look at this amazing kingdom that I've established.
Yeah, essentially being very prideful and like himself, and then he happens, and then the fulfillment of the dream comes, and he's basically reduced to a beast, and he's humbled. In the same way, I imagine that this beast that represents the kingdom would have been very prideful in its appearance, but as its wings are plucked out, it's being humbled, and then it's given the heart of a man, and it stands up.
Well, yeah, and I would argue that this one is the easiest to interpret, and I would argue that it actually gives us an interpretive lens by which to interpret the rest of the dream.
Yeah.
Because it's very easy to identify who this is referring to, right? Who is it referring to?
Babylon.
It's referring to Babylon, right? If you go back to the prior prophets, like Jeremiah, whenever we went through it, the animals most associated with Babylon, whenever you read through the prophets, are lions and eagles, right? Mm. And then, like we just saw, like in the story that Nick was describing, you've got Nebuchadnezzar, who is this proud, arrogant, beastly man, right? I mean, he's literally like earlier in the book, he's like hungering to devour the saints, like he's wanting to have them thrown into the fiery furnace, and he's wanting to eat them up, basically. Yeah. But then you have this story where it says he was driven away from mankind, and he began eating grass like cattle, and his body was drenched with the dew of heaven until his hair had grown like eagle's feathers, and his nails like bird's claws. And so he is reduced to a beast, and his hair is described as like that of an eagle, right? But then what is the ultimate result of Nebuchadnezzar's literal beast-like transformation? What does he end up doing?
He ends up praising God.
Well, he humbles himself, and God restores him, and then he gets up and praises God. And so it seems like that is what's being described in this very first beast, right? The first was like a lion. He had the wings of an eagle, so that'd be describing Babylon, and specifically Nebuchadnezzar. And it said, I kept looking until its wings were plucked, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. So what ends up happening by the end? What is the end result of this beast?
It basically gets turned into a man.
Yeah, it's almost transformed. It's not totally transformed into a man, but the wings are taken away, and the lion is now standing up like a man. And then it says, a heart of a man was given to it. So it is still a beast, but it is a beast that now has the heart of a man. And so this seems to represent Nebuchadnezzar, right? Who he was humbled, and by the end of the story, he is still a Babylonian Gentile emperor, but he's praising the God of Israel, right? And so he is given a new heart. And so this would help us interpret it because there is this dual nature to this section that I would say we also saw in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, right? Because first off, I already said this earlier. What did the golden head of the statue in Nebuchadnezzar's dream represent?
Babylon.
It represented Babylon, but who else did it represent? Nebuchadnezzar,
Yeah.
right? And so there's this twofold way to interpret it. It represents the king, but it also represents the kingdom, right? And so every single one of these, I would argue, it probably represents a central king figure, but then it also represents the kingdom as a whole. And those two things can't be divorced. And we're going to have more evidence for this later on in the chapter, right? And so the first one, it directly corresponds with Daniel chapter 2, right? The golden statue, it was Nebuchadnezzar, but it was also Babylon, right? Now, this first beast, which is the lion, but it had wings like an eagle, that is Nebuchadnezzar, but it's also Babylon, right? It was very beast-like, but by the end of the story, it's actually humbled and more manly by the end, which is ironic because Babylon is the one that destroyed the people of Judah, which is crazy. And so, with that interpretive lens, it makes the next ones a little easier to interpret. And so, verse 5, behold, another beast, a second one in the likeness of a bear. And it was raised up on one side, and 3 ribs were in its mouth between its teeth. And thus they said to it, arise, devour much meat. So what's going on there?
Another beast comes up. It's like a bear. There's, it doesn't ever change from being a bear.
Mm-hmm.
And it's got like these bones that are between the teeth, and it's told to devour.
And it's just consuming. There's no sense in it being humble. It just keeps consuming and consuming and consuming.
Yeah, it just consumes, and it basically stays from the beginning to end, right? And so, whenever you think of the imagery of a bear, what do you just think of? I mean,
Like cocaine
grizzly
bear.
First rampaging animal.
yeah, fierce, rampaging, powerful, right? You'll notice that all of these have certain characteristics that are just like, they're like, what we think of nowadays is the same as what an ancient person would think of, right? Bears, intimidating, powerful, scary. I think that's the main thing you can take away from it, right? What is unique about this bear?
It has like essentially a rib cage, like 3 ribs.
Even before that, there's a weird detail there.
It's raised up on one side.
Yeah, what does that mean?
Is like one side, is it uneven?
That's what I'm assuming, right? It's a kind of awkward description. It almost sounds like it's lopsided, right? To where it's almost like one side of the bear is bigger than the other.
Yeah.
I would suggest that this actually helps us interpret it again, because what would this seem to suggest?
Disoriented.
Yeah, so disoriented maybe.
I think I'm looking into it too much.
I feel like it's more so that like it's already absorbed another beast to where it's become that sort, or it's
Okay.
like broken.
Well,
In a way.
he probably already gone this way, calling it disoriented, but maybe it's like not in its right mind and has to be help being supported up.
Okay, you could argue that. So the way that this is generally interpreted is the idea that, so it is powerful, but the power isn't even, right? And this would imply that there's 2 forces at work here, and one's more powerful than the other. And so we would associate this with the Medo-Persian Empire, where there's the Medes and the Persians working together, but the Persians are much stronger than the Medes, right? And so whenever you're looking at the bear, it is powerful, but there's something about it that's just off, and that's because one side of it is way stronger than the other, right? And so that like it just looks weird because that's in general that's not how
There's a
empires
reason
work.
why,
It's like a drunken berserker.
you can refer to it as the Medo-Persian Empire or just the Persian Empire.
Yeah,
It's the-
nobody calls it
the
just the
Medo
Meadow
part is-
part. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. The Meadow part is just it's optional
What
add-on.
does meadow even mean in that context?
The Medes,
Medes,
but like so, yeah.
okay.
So like there's the Medes and the Persians.
Okay.
The
Uh,
Persians actually, like, how the empire was initially formed is that the Persians basically conquered the Medes and were like, hey, we think you guys are cool as rulers and stuff, so we won't completely destroy you guys, but you're kind of going to be under us.
Yeah.
It's like how in Austria-Hungary, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, it was the Austrian side that was like more powerful.
Okay.
Yeah, and so that's in general what people would interpret this like. But again, I mean, for now we can just move on. But yeah, so this would be associated with the Medo-Persians. But then it says that there were 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth, and it said, "Arise and devour much meat."
I think that's likely in reference to like, usually when people think of the Persian Empire, they namely think of 3 kings, which is Cyrus the Great, Darius the Great, and Xerxes. Those are like the 3 kings that come to mind. So if you're thinking of it from the lens of, that, then if you're associating it with both the kingdom and the kingdom's like rulers, that's the way I would lean. I don't know if that's necessarily the same interpretation you had.
So I would have it a little different, mainly because since the ribs are in the teeth, it seems like it's something that they're destroying rather than it being the kings themselves. Even though, I mean, that would be a valid interpretation, I guess. But since it's like it's in their teeth and it says "arise and devour much meat," it seems like this is something that the Medo-Persians are consuming.
Okay.
Right? And so whenever I've looked into it, people typically associate this with like the 3 major victories that the Medo-Persians are associated with, specifically over Lydia and Asia Minor, and then over Babylon, and then over Egypt.
Yeah.
And some of this you start getting into a little bit more speculation than like we can be confident about, because ultimately Daniel's not going to break down every single thing. He's just telling us what he saw, and then I mean it's really kind of left up to us to kind of iron out the finer details. And so really there are different ways to interpret it, but by and large people would associate this with Medo-Persians, and there's different ways to look at it. And so this leads to verse 6. After this I kept looking. Poor Daniel. He's just like, he wants to look away, but he's like, I'm just going to keep on looking.
Wake me up.
Yeah. After this I kept looking, and behold, another one, like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it.
I feel like one of these 2 beasts is referring to the Roman Empire.
So there's only one beast described here in verse 6.
No, I mean between verses 6 and 7.
Yes.
One of them I feel like is referring to the Roman Empire.
But historically, who came after the Medes and the Persians?
Alexander the Great.
Alexander the Great. And we're actually going to see more explicit references to Alexander the Great later on. And the references later on are so explicit that it actually led many it continues to lead many scholars to argue that Daniel had to have been written centuries later, because it's so specific that just a modern historian could just look and be like, oh, that's Alexander the Great. And if you don't believe in predictive prophecy, like, you have to just argue, well, this was written later on.
It's going to be a little awkward for them if we find a real compelling evidence.
We have found pretty compelling evidence that it was written earlier.
So Alexander the Great was the Greek Empire, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. So the Greeks.
Or technically Macedonian, but
Yeah.
we don't have to get into that. Essentially his empire morphed into the Greek Empire, which is part of what we'll discuss with this, because it's important that the beast has like 4 heads.
That's what we're going to do right now.
Yeah.
So, first off, when you think of a leopard, what is the first thing you think of?
Fast.
Speed.
Yes.
Right? You think of just absolute speed. Okay. And
Absolute
then,
speed.
if you give that leopard wings, what's that going to do?
Even faster.
Make it even faster. Right? And so this thing knows how to pounce, and it knows how to do it quickly, but then it says it has 4 heads. And this is literally the perfect description of the Macedonian or Greek Empire under Alexander the Great. Because Alexander the Great conquered pretty much the entire known world, not the entire thing, but like a pretty good chunk of it in 10 years, and died at the age of 32. Like, there's a reason, there's a lot of people who have been called the Great. You know, I mean, you have Herod the Great, you've got all these different, like Cyrus the Great, and sure, all of them have reasons to be called that. But Alexander the Great literally earned the title. Here we are, sitting in here, dudes in our mid-20s and stuff like that. And what are we doing?
I'm 33.
Yeah, there you go.
Thank you for
Like,
making me feel old.
no, but
I mean,
I'm almost in the 30s, but the thing is,
You're no
like,
Alexander.
no, but what I'm getting at there, Alexander the Great,
He's a big meanie.
yeah, but Alexander the Great was dead by then. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, he did all of this stuff. And we're over here just like sitting down talking about books, which isn't bad, because, I mean, we're studying the Bible, right?
But
But,
violent life, thank you.
well, yes, no, but it's understandable why he's called the Great, because of what he accomplished, right? But the issue is, he died at such a young age that he did not leave behind a suitable heir to take over the throne.
Mhm.
Because he died very suddenly, right? And there's a whole mystery around his death. But as a result of his death, because there was no suitable heir, his kingdom was split amongst 4 people,
Wow.
right? And so it was split into the 4, like it's like a tetrarchy, basically. And that's how it went on for a while. And whenever you actually read, like, this is the, so by the time the New Testament ends, the Old Testament ends, the Medo-Persians are still in charge. By the time the New Testament begins, you have already had the Macedonian Empire rise and fall, and the Romans are in charge. And it's specifically the Macedonian Empire which explains why the New Testament is written in a different language altogether. Right? What language is the New Testament written in?
Greek.
It's written in Greek. And that's because this Alexander the Great guy, he loved Greek culture. And so he set in motion the Greekifying of the entire world, which is a process that we know as what? Hellenization, right? Hellenization is the Greekifying of everything, and as Alexander conquered the known world, he began Hellenizing everything. And so by the time you get to the New Testament, basically everybody knows Greek. That is like the common language of the empire. And so the New Testament's written in Greek. But yeah, so this directly correlates very well with the third beast, right? And then, after this, I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, fearsome and terrifying, and extraordinarily strong, and it had large iron teeth. Now, what do you notice about this 4th beast?
Well, the first
It's
thing.
not going to description.
Well, it's not. Yeah, we don't know what type of animal it is.
Yeah, I was about to say that's the first thing I noticed.
Yeah. So the first one, it's mainly like the main thing, lion, right? Second one, bear. Third one, leopard. Fourth one, he doesn't even describe it. It's almost like it's like either he doesn't have a word to describe it, or he's so terrified he can't bring himself to describe it, right? And I would actually argue that the second thing is probably the more likely.
It's just like, what the heck is that?
Well, no, and that's because whenever we get later on into the chapter, we're going to see that is how Daniel responds. Like he's like this 4th beast. The other 3 don't really scare him that much.
Belshazzar sees the writing on the wall, and his knees are just knocking together.
Yeah, but yeah. So this 4th one, like the first 3 are not going to really shock Daniel that much, but something about the 4th beast literally is going to freak him out to where he's going to keep going back to it. And so he sees this. There's a 4th beast, and it has large iron teeth, and that immediately makes us think of Nebuchadnezzar's dream, because if you remember, the 4th kingdom was a kingdom of iron, right? It devoured and crushed and trampled down the remainder with its feet. So what does it do?
It conquers all the other kingdoms.
Yeah, it conquers all the other ones. And so you will notice that there is a different, like, what is the main difference between Daniel's vision and Nebuchadnezzar's dream? How is Nebuchadnezzar's dream, like, how does it present the 4 kingdoms?
Unified.
As one big system,
Yeah.
right? Whereas in this, it's successive systems that are each destroying the previous. And both of those are true at the same time, right? Because in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, basically what Daniel was arguing is that God was willfully allowing Gentiles to entertain this power for a certain amount of time over the Jewish people, right? And so this was God's system of the time of the Gentiles, right? He was allowing these Gentile people to rise up and rule over the Jewish people. And so in a way it was one system. But now, in Daniel's dream, this is not a dream that is given to Nebuchadnezzar, it's a dream given to Daniel. And so we're going to have to talk about what point God's getting across here. But for now on, let's just keep reading. It has large iron teeth. It devoured and crushed and trampled down the remainder with its feet. So it destroys all the other empires, wipes them out. And it was different from all the beasts that were before it. And it had 10 horns. So it doesn't look like a lion. It doesn't look like a bear. It doesn't look like a leopard. It looks like something altogether different. And it has 10 horns. And if you've read the book of Revelation, this should sound familiar because there is a beast with 10 horns in Revelation. And so you should hopefully be making some of the connections there. But we're not going to get much in Revelation today because we're going to mainly try to interpret this in light of Daniel. But that will sound familiar. While I was contemplating the horns, behold, another horn, a little one, came up among them. And 3 of the first horns were pulled out by the roots before it. And behold, this horn possessed eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great boasts. Alright, so what does he see here?
So he's a beast with 10 horns. 3 of them get plucked out, and then it grows little ones, so now it has 8 horns. And the little horn that grew was bragging, essentially.
Yeah. So this last little horn, it says it had eyes like the eyes of a man and a mouth speaking great boasts, which is just weird. So like literally in this dream, he's watching it, and this horn, it has a face, and it can see and it can speak, and when it opens its mouth, it's boasting. And I think it's understandable why Daniel's going to be freaked out by this, right? Because this is a weird dream. Like it's just absolutely weird, absolutely terrifying. And even then, like notice it said that he was already contemplating the horns, right? So something about this fourth beast in particular is drawing his attention to where he cannot explain it. And then to make matters worse, you have 3 of the horns being displaced, a smaller horn growing up from it, and then it starts boasting and talking, and it's like, this is something very weird. But in general, we would associate this probably with the Roman Empire, right? There are some people who argue for a different interpretation, but I think that the Roman Empire is probably the best interpretation, or the most straightforward one. But even then, I'm going to be straightforward with you right now. I do not have a good explanation for everything that happens in this vision. The other ones, to me, I find somewhat straightforward, but I'm kind of with Daniel here, where the last one is going to be very confusing. And I actually think that's okay, to where I don't know if we're supposed to be able to explain all of it. And so for right now, we're just going to move on.
One thing I do want to baseline is this could be in reference to the Roman Empire, because referred to the human, like, lion figure, right? And that's let's just say the Babylonians. Then you had, we discussed the bear, Medo-Persians.
Uh-huh.
Then you had the leopard, Greek,
Uh-huh.
Alexander the Great, and then you have this last one, and who does that leave? Roman.
Well, yeah, and so that's what I was saying. It is the Roman Empire. I would say that that's the most common interpretation and the most likely. But there are certain things about it that I do find challenging.
Mm-hmm.
Just because of, like, just certain things like the little horn and all that stuff. This is where people start getting conspiratorial. For right now, I would rather just leave it be, and I would rather just not have a complete answer, rather than overconfidently saying something that we can't necessarily know. But before we move on, let me ask you this. What is the purpose of this? Like, put yourself in Daniel's shoes, right? He has been dwelling in Babylon for decades. And then one night he goes to sleep and he has this dream. And he's going to be terrified. Why do you think that is?
Well, I believe the purpose of this dream is to show that kingdoms will come and go. And
Okay.
it will be brutal, and it will be terrifying, and it won't be pretty. And there will be a lot of blood spilled in the process.
Yeah. But why is that relevant to Daniel, do you think?
Do you think it's a way of, like, I don't want to necessarily say humbling him, but, like, you know, I really don't know.
So let's read this in the context of a Jewish person. What do the Jewish people know about their exile?
That it's going to last 70 years.
It's going to last 70 years. Then they're going back. And what is something that the Jewish people have been waiting for centuries at this point, and which, throughout the prophets, has consistently been associated with the exile?
Mashiach.
The Messiah. Right? So you go way back to Genesis, and God promises that there's going to be this deliverer who's going to deliver them from their sins, and who is going to basically redeem humanity and restore creation. And as you continue reading through the Hebrew Scriptures, you keep getting more and more prophecies that kind of, like, they narrow down exactly who this Messiah figure is going to be. Right? You eventually know he's going to come through Abraham, through Isaac, through Jacob, through Judah, through David, right? Like you're having this like funneling out process where you're getting a better idea of who this guy's going to be. And then by the time you get to like Jeremiah, who is, we know that Daniel, like later on in this book, he's going to be studying the words of Jeremiah. Jeremiah says that the Messiah is going to establish a new covenant, right? And he's going to do all these things that is going to basically give man a new heart and solve the sin problem. And I would argue that the Jewish people, in many ways, were probably expecting that the return from exile would probably be accompanied by the Messiah. Because keep in mind, at this point, like, they weren't expecting there to be this huge gap in the Davidic Empire, like the Davidic kingdom. You know, David had a king on the throne until they were sent away. And so if I were a Jewish person at this time, I would think, okay, well, once we get back from Babylon, we're going to go back, and Messiah's going to show up, and he's going to fix everything. Does that make sense? That's what I'd be thinking in my head. And, like, if you go back to Daniel's previous vision, or Nebuchadnezzar's vision in chapter 2, this is kind of what it was hinting at, right? It said, okay, there's going to be these kingdoms, but the Messiah is going to show up. And, like, it talked about, like, there's this stone that's going to show up, it's going to crush the statue, and that stone is going to grow up into a mountain and represent the kingdom of God. And so there was this promise that the Messiah would show up, and it even suggested that maybe it would be delayed for a little bit, and there would be some kingdoms in between. But keep in mind, how has Daniel been doing in Babylon? Has he been, has it been horrible for him?
Nope.
No, he's been actually chilling so far, right? I mean, yes, he's gotten thrown. He's going to be thrown into some lions' dens later on and stuff, and there have been challenges. But he's he's pretty up there in the chain of command and stuff like that. And so I think that from a Jewish perspective, probably the outlook on the future was pretty positive, right? Sure, whenever we get back, there might be some different kingdoms rising, falling and stuff like that. But the Messiah's going to show up, and it'll all be good, right? And then he has this dream. And whenever he sees what kingdoms are going to come, what is he learning about them?
They're brutal. They're terrifying.
They each get worse, right? They each get more vicious, more violent, more terrifying, to where you finally get to this final one, and he's as we're going to see, he's just shaken up, and he's terrified. And in many ways, this is the reverse of what I would argue that a Jewish person would be expecting, right? They're thinking, we're going to come back from exile, and everything's going to be great. David will sit on his throne, and everything will be perfect again. Then he has this vision.
Hunky-dory.
Yes, and it shakes him up, and he realizes, oh, crud.
You gotta make it past the final boss first.
Yeah, it's oh, things are just going to get worse from here, and it's not going to get better, right? If I thought that Babylon was the worst, well, the Persians are going to show up, and they're going to be more vicious. And then there's going to be the Greeks, and there's going to be the Romans, and it's just going to get worse and worse and worse, and the Jewish people are going to be suffering underneath all of this. And so I would argue that this really shakes Daniel up, which then makes the next. Here's a little illustration here's a little illustration of the different animals.
Hey, we know what that fourth beast is now. It's a red gator.
Yeah, so usually people depict the fourth beast as a dragon-like figure, and that's primarily because of the Book of Revelation.
Yeah.
But we really don't know what it is. It doesn't describe it at all. But I guess the fact that he highlights the teeth, I guess you could argue that it's a gator. And that would be fitting because he's in Babylon, and I imagine there were some gators at the river. So there's some depictions of that. And so Daniel sees these visions. They probably do not look as cute and cuddly as the ones here.
No, I was going to say that 3 of the kingdoms look like, they're beautiful, majestic creatures. And then the 4th is just an abomination.
Well, yeah, and he's it makes sense why he's so terrified. And so I would argue this is scary. And so he's looking at all these beasts upon the chaotic waters, and in many ways, they are just as chaotic. And also, keep in mind, what did I say that we should read this in light of? Whenever we think about chaotic waters. Genesis chapter 1. And in Genesis chapter 1, how does Genesis 1 culminate?
With God creating man.
Yeah, and what does he do? What does he do with man?
Gives it dominion.
Dominion over what?
The whole earth.
All the beasts of the field and stuff.
Yeah.
But what do you see in this vision that Daniel's having?
The beasts are given dominion.
Yeah. There's these beasts, and they are ruling over man. Mm. So it basically, in Daniel's vision, creation has been flipped on its head, right? Instead of humans ruling over humans ruling over beasts, there are these beasts who have taken over the world, and they are ruling over man.
No, or maybe this is another way to interpret it, is that man has grown so proud and prideful that they have the mind of the beast.
Well, that's what I'm arguing. I'm not saying that literal animals are it's not
I know what you mean.
No, but the idea is that humans have become so beast-like that they're no better than the things they were supposed to create, they were supposed to rule over. And so now they're not even normal beasts, right? They're these hybrid beasts who are ruling over and oppressing man, and it's absolutely terrifying. And so in times, whenever the world is just terrifying you, and you think there's no hope, where's the best place to look?
The Bible.
Yes, but when looking down at the earth, is just really freaking you out, where's the best way you should look if you want to have a hopeful turn of emotions, I guess?
Look up.
Look up to
Heaven.
the heavens, and that's what Daniel's gonna do. Sorry, I was just trying to set this up. So he's looking out at the water. It's super chaotic. He's like, oh my gosh, history is just gonna get worse and worse and worse, and people are gonna get more and more sinful. Kind of like we saw in Genesis chapters like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You know, man just gets more and more sinful. And then he says he kept looking until thrones were set up, and the Ancient of Days was seated. His clothing was like white snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was ablaze with fire. Its wheels were a burning fire. A river of fire was flowing and coming out from before him. Thousands upon thousands were attending him, and myriads upon myriads were standing before him. The court sat, and the books were opened. Then I kept looking because of the sound of the great boastful words which the horn was speaking. I kept looking until the beast was killed, and its body was destroyed and given to the burning fire. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but an extension of life was given to them for an appointed season of time. Okay. So, what does Daniel say here? What does he see?
Well, first, he switches from just explaining his prophecy to a poem,
Mm-hmm.
which mean or like a song, because he's basically praising God in this moment, because that's who he sees, or the Ancient of Days, which is
Yeah.
God.
Yeah. So, he says, I kept looking until the thrones were set up. And I think that's interesting because he doesn't say how long he kept looking for, right? And so, for all we know, there was more stuff that happened in between the fourth beast and this future throne being set up. He just doesn't detail anything, right? He just says he keeps looking until thrones were set up, right? And it doesn't say just one throne, it says several thrones, which is interesting, right? So there's a bunch of thrones being set up, and then the Ancient of Days was seated. Who is the Ancient of Days?
I'm gonna assume God.
Yeah, why would we assume that's God?
Because isn't that one of the ways he's described in like Genesis, or which book is he described as?
This is the only place where he's described that way. Yeah. So it's just because Ancient of Days refers to like basically the everlasting one, right? And so this would be the only it's honestly one of my favorite ways to hear God described, like just like the idea of the ancient one, like the one who sat on the throne before any of these guys were set up.
Yeah.
Do you know
Right.
the Hebrew for this?
The one before.
The Aramaic, I'm not sure. I can look it up.
Aramaic.
Yeah. So he sees the Ancient of Days being set up. The Aramaic phrase is it's the Atik Yamin. Yomin. Atik Yomin. And so he sees the Ancient of Days seated, and his clothing was like white snow. So what do we see about this? About God, right? This is God being described. He's sitting on the throne. Well, let's just start with that. Why is this significant in light of what Daniel just saw?
Because it shows that the beasts don't have true dominion.
Yeah. The things that he is seeing happening above the chaotic waters are enough to terrify him, right? Instead of creation being brought into the dominion it was supposed to have and chaos being brought to order, you just see chaos abounding. And chaos is feeding over itself to where these beasts are ruling over man. That is not encouraging. However, he sees God sitting up on his throne, and that reassures him everything's going to be okay. Right? The Ancient of Days, he's still there. He's allowing this to happen. He is sovereignly controlling all of this. And the Ancient of Days is described in a very different way than the beasts. His clothing was like white snow. What does that tell us about him?
He's pure.
He's pure. Right? The hair of his head was like pure wool. So what color is his hair?
White.
White. If his hair is like pure wool, what does that say about him? It kind of ties to his title. He's old, but what do you associate with old people?
Wisdom.
Wisdom, right? And also, where else are we going to see a person being described in the same language?
Revelation?
Revelation, but who's being described like that?
Jesus?
Jesus. That's important to keep in mind, right? And so Jesus is going to be described in the same way. Which tells you what the early Christians believed about Jesus. Because right now, this is Yahweh, God of creation, being described this way. And so, he's pure, he's wise, his throne was ablaze with fire. Its wheels were a burning fire. Fun fact that people don't talk about it often enough, ancient thrones often had wheels. To where they could actually be they're like chariots, basically. And so, whenever it talks about a throne having a wheel, that's not like a weird thing. That's actually what a lot of thrones were like, so they can be moved around. But what do we see about his throne?
It's
on
covered in
fire.
fire. Yep.
Yeah, it is a consuming fire. But he's sitting atop it and not being consumed, which, what does that remind you of?
Burning bush.
It reminds you of the burning bush, and even more recently,
Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
yeah, there was one like a son of man, or I guess he was described as one like a son of the gods.
Yeah.
And he's in the fire without being consumed.
And then there's also, maybe not as relevant, but Elijah.
Oh yeah.
The chariot of fire.
Chariot, yes.
Yes. Yeah. But yeah, so we've got God sitting on his throne. It's burning fire, but he's not being consumed. But also, what do we know about fire?
It burns. It really hurts.
Yeah, it burns and is very intense, and it does consume. Right? A small flame can set an entire forest ablaze. And so, if all these other kingdoms think they're powerful, they got nothing on God. A river was flowing and coming out from before him. Oh, sorry. What's the river made of?
Fire.
Fire. And so his throne is fire. The wheels are fire. The river is fire. What does that say about this God and his power?
He can consume anything.
Yeah,
so
he can. He can consume anything. And there's so much fire around him that he can burn up all those chaotic waters and the beasts that are coming out of them. Thousands upon thousands were attending him. I believe that the word there for thousands is like the largest number that the Aramaic language had. So it says it's like literally just it's almost like infinity upon infinity, like that'd be like the notion. So thousands upon thousands were attending him, and myriads upon myriads were standing before him, or maybe the myriads that's what it is. I don't know. And so there's all these people standing before him, and the court sat, and the books were opened. What's going on there?
We don't know.
It sounds like judgment.
It sounds like it's judgment. And this would seem to be a description of stuff that we've talked about before, but this is like God's divine counsel. Right? God is sitting up on his throne, and remember it said that other thrones were set up before him. Right? And so there's all these other thrones being set up, and these are, this is what we would typically call the little g gods in the Bible, like other Elohim, who they're not the all-powerful creator of the universe, but they are part of God's divine counsel. And they all sit before him. If you go back to Deuteronomy chapter 32, what does it tell us that God did with these Elohim at the Tower of Babel?
He basically appointed each one of them over a nation.
Over a nation, right? So, and we actually saw a hint at this earlier in Daniel. Remember whenever it says that a watcher came and talked to Daniel, right? And we were saying that this watcher was probably an Elohim that was put over Babylon.
Yeah.
And so you got this idea that Yahweh, he is the God of Israel, but he's also the God of everything. He is the Ancient of Days. He's sitting high and lifted up on his throne. And now all these other little Elohim are sitting on their thrones before him, and they all have books opened. And the idea is that God is about to give them instructions on how to go about judgment, right? And so this is basically like a divine courtroom, and the judge is about to let forth his sentence. And so I would imagine that this comforts Daniel quite a bit. But as we're going to see, he can't get his mind off the fourth beast. Something about it is troubling him. Then I kept looking, because of the sound of the great boastful words which the horn was speaking. So apparently whatever this horn is saying is so proud and so boastful and so arrogant that it distracts Daniel from the divine judgment that's happening. Like you have to wonder, what is this guy saying? Right? That literally could distract Daniel from this amazing moment right here. So he keeps looking, not because of what he sees with the Ancient of Days, but because of what he sees with the stupid horn. I kept looking until the beast was killed, and its body was destroyed and given to the burning fire. So the horn is boasting, but then what eventually happens?
Killed.
Yeah, so despite the boastful words of this horn, he is not able to avoid the judgment that's coming. Right? And this, I would say, is the thing that probably gives Daniel some more comfort. Right? Because Here, even as God was sitting on his throne, this little horn had the audacity to boast before him. But then, you don't hear about a battle or anything taking place, huh?
Nope.
It just says,
Unless you're in the Septuagint.
what does Septuagint say?
It says that the horn was fighting against like the holy ones.
Oh, that's going to show up later on in this chapter.
Yeah,
just
but
not
it says it
right
like
here.
earlier in.
Oh, okay.
That's what I was trying to point out earlier.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. Yeah, because that is going to show up later on in the text, so it's probably just, yeah. And so, but we don't see a battle yet, in this text at least. We just see the beast is killed, and he's thrown into the burning fire. So the river of fire. Where does this language also show up?
Revelation.
Revelation again, right? Where you have a beast and his false prophet who are being thrown into the lake of burning fire. Which would lead us towards a certain interpretation of who this little horn would seem to be. But again, if we're talking about this is the Roman Empire, there's some interesting things that are raised from that. Verse 12. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but an extension of life was given to them for an appointed season of time. That's interesting.
Yeah.
What the heck's going on there?
Seems like
They're not.
he took away their power, but he's not going to completely destroy them.
Which is also weird, because what did we read about the fourth beast earlier?
It died.
It trampled all the other
Oh,
nations.
Yeah, so we already saw that the fourth beast seemed to have trampled all the other beasts, but it turns out apparently they're not as dead as we thought, but their dominion is taken away, but then they're not totally killed yet. And who is it who's extending their life? God. And so this just raises some interesting, like, it's like, okay, so it would seem like these empires aren't fully dead.
If you
Right,
wanna
and
look at it from a historical lens, you know, there's no land today that's called Rome, but Greece still exists.
Well, what I would argue is that this is probably where people get the groundwork that some of this stuff probably is referring to what we would call like eschatological events, like things in the end times. The idea is that the four empires that Daniel is describing are going to be consecutive, starting with Babylon. So Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. But not everything he's describing here is going to happen just during that time. Right? There's going to be some stuff that, even when those empires seem to fall, they're not going to be totally destroyed. And in some way, later on, they're going to rise up again. In a way to where, are they going to still be called the same thing? Maybe not necessarily. I don't know all the details, right? Like, this is where people start getting into weird, hyper-specific speculation. I don't think that we can know with utmost confidence what's going on, right? I think that this is more one of those things where, like, once it happens, in hindsight, we'll be like, oh, that's what that was about. But I don't think that we can, like, know with confidence, oh, this is what this is. But a lot of times people, like, you know, they'll go into their mom's basement and they'll, like, type out, like, 500-page things on, like, how they know exactly what's going to happen. Yeah, and I don't think that's what we're supposed to do here. I think that the whole idea is Daniel says, even when those empires are destroyed, God is not going to allow them to totally die. And he is saving this for an appointed time where they are going to have power again. And that is consistent with something that we also, again, see in Revelation. Right? But in Revelation, who is it who is given power for a short time?
Oh gosh, I can't remember.
It's the devil. Right? It says that the devil is bound in chains for 1,000 years, and then he is given one more chance, like to go out and deceive the nations for a short time. And so I don't know if this is referring to the same moment. I'm not sure, but the language is at least similar. But all of this leads to what I would argue are not only the most important verses in this chapter, but probably the most important verses in the book of Daniel. Right? Because Daniel's going to keep looking in the night visions. Verse 13. I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, one like a son of man was coming. And he came up to the Ancient of Days, and came near before him. And to him was given dominion, glory, and a kingdom, that all the peoples, nations, and men of every tongue might serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which will not be taken away, and his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed. All right. So what do we see now?
The return of Jesus.
Well,
That's what I take away from
I would agree with that,
Yeah.
but let's read it from a Jewish perspective
Yeah.
before we jump to the Christian perspective.
I just couldn't think of any other way to describe
Yes. What do we actually see happening here? At its simplest. So he's seeing 4 kingdoms arise. What does he see now?
God giving an everlasting kingdom to one like the Son of Man.
Yeah, so there's a 5th kingdom, and unlike the previous 4, this one will have no end. Right? So the first beast, we saw that there was a lion with eagle's wings, and it was displaced by the bear. But then the bear was displaced by the leopard. And the leopard was displaced by whatever the heck that 4th beast was. But now there's this 5th kingdom that's established, and it's not going to have any end. But whenever Daniel looks at this, first off, is it rising from the sea?
Nope.
No, where is it coming from?
The clouds.
The clouds. It's coming from quite literally the opposite. So instead of coming from the chaotic waters of creation, it's coming from above creation, from the sky, from the heavens. Quick question: who dwells in the heavens?
God.
God.
God, right? That's where the gods dwell. But Daniel says that this guy doesn't look like God. What does he look like? Does he look like a beast?
No.
Nope.
No. What does he look like?
A son of man.
Son of man. What does that mean?
Human.
He looks like a dude, right? He just looks like a regular guy.
Jesus, is that you?
Yeah. Well, no, it's very weird. He's looking, and we do have to admit, Jewish people will often push back on this, because I will say, Jewish people agree that this passage is about Messiah, right? As Christians, we would argue that this is indicating that Messiah is going to be God in the flesh. Whereas Jewish people would push back on this, and they'll say, well, that's not exactly what's going on here. But I think that the way that they spin this just really does not make any sense. But at the very least, what we can say is he sees somebody who looks like a man. So he does not look like a beast, which is good. And whatever he has dominion over all things, what we see here is a restoration of created order, right? Because, in the previous visions, or the previous beasts, we saw creation flipped on its head, right? We have these beasts reigning over men. But now you have a man who is coming and he is subjugating the beasts, he is establishing dominion over them, and he is ruling over the world as intended. Which is what God intended for Adam to do, right? This is why when you get to the New Testament, people like Paul are going to call Jesus the last Adam, right? So he's the image of the invisible God. He's doing what he's supposed to do. So he sees one like a son of man coming, but he's on the clouds. Why is that significant? Him being on the clouds.
That shows that he's not limited to the earthly space. He has a far greater expansive power.
Okay. Well, even if you're just going back to Genesis 1, what did God give man dominion over?
The whole earth.
The earth. What is not part of the earth?
The heavens.
The heavens, right? Yeah. Whenever you look at Genesis 1, it separates creation into 2 things. The heavens and the earth, right? The earth is what we stand on. The heavens is everything above, right? Humanity does not have power over the heavens, right? Even news anchors, they can try to predict what the weather's going to be, and they suck at it even to this day, right? They'll be like, it's going to be a clear day, and it ends up pouring. We do not have power over the weather. This guy is riding the clouds like it's his chariot. So this is why it's so striking to Daniel. He looks, and the guy looks like a man. But he's doing something that only God can do. And do we have any other evidence that riding the clouds is what God does?
Yes.
Where?
The wilderness.
Keep going.
Well, back in
Exodus.
yeah. When it describes God protecting the people of Israel in the wilderness, it describes him as a cloud, above them.
Yeah, pillar of fire by night, pillar of cloud by day. Yeah.
Yeah. So it says Yahweh went before them in the pillar of cloud. So who is the one who rides the clouds? It's God, right? And it's not just there, right? Whenever they get to Mount Sinai, it says that God descended upon the mountain in a thick cloud.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever God descended into the tabernacle, he descended into the tabernacle in a thick cloud. Whenever he went to the temple, he descended into the temple in a thick cloud. Whenever you read through the Psalms, it says, who rides the clouds but the Lord? And so whenever you read through the Hebrew Scriptures, the Old Testament, the consistent testimony is that there's only one person who rides the clouds, and that's God.
And it ain't Baal.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, and there's that too, right? Whenever you look at the pagan the pagan mythology and stuff like that, the Canaanites and stuff, there's this thing called the Baal cycle, right? And it tells us some of their myths about Baal, who's mentioned a lot in the Bible. And they believe that Baal was the storm god, kind of like basically he was the Canaanite equivalent of Zeus. And so Baal is always described as riding the clouds. And so the Israelite, Moses comes along and he says, no. You might think that Baal rides the clouds, but from personal experience, I can tell you that it's Yahweh who rides the clouds. And he can actually destroy your God, and you're puny. And that's kind of what Elijah's referring to whenever he has the battle with the prophets of Baal. Because remember, their whole thing is that they're fighting over whose God will send down fire.
Yeah.
And Baal just doesn't show up. And then, shortly after God shows up and rains down fire, not long afterwards, God sends a cloud with rain. And so the idea is that Baal ain't the cloud rider, God is the cloud rider. And the consistent testimony from Genesis to Malachi is that there's one person who rides the clouds, and that's God. Except for this vision. Because Daniel looks, and he sees somebody who looks like a guy, but he's doing what only God does. And he is riding the clouds as if they are his chariot, and he has entire dominion over them. And you might be tempted to think, oh, well maybe this just represents God himself. And Daniel says, no, because look at what the guy does.
He comes up to the Ancient of Days.
Yes, he rides the clouds of heaven, one like a son of man coming, and he came up to the Ancient of Days. Well, where was the Ancient of Days at? Where did we see him?
On the throne of fire.
He's sitting on the throne. And so we've got the Ancient of Days sitting on his throne in heaven, and now you've got this one like a son of man riding on the clouds, and he approaches the Ancient of Days, which would suggest that he's somebody separate. But that's confusing, because now you've got this person who looks like a man, and he's doing what only God can do, but now he's approaching God, and as we're going to see, he's about to receive from God what only God can have. Which really just makes things very confusing. So he came up to the Ancient of Days, and he came near before him. You can imagine this one like a son of man, getting off the cloud, walking before the Ancient of Days, and kneeling down. And it's very clear, as we're going to see in verse 14, this is the Messiah. And to him was given dominion, glory, and a kingdom. Who's the one giving this?
God.
The Ancient of Days, right? God is giving this to him. And to me, the thing that's significant is it says he's not just given dominion and a kingdom, he's given dominion, glory, and a kingdom. Whereas you go back to the other prophets, and God says, I am Yahweh, I give my glory to no other. And so now, you've got a person who looks like a dude, doing what only God can do, but then he comes up to God and receives from God what only God can have. And which God clarified he will not share with anybody else. But then, it's very clear that Daniel's implying that this guy is the Messianic king who they've been waiting for. Because we know from other prophets that the Messiah is the one who is going to rule and reign forever. But thus far, we've only thought, the Messiah is going to be ruling in the name of God. But now you're looking and you're like, wait a second. Is this suggesting... No, surely not. Is this suggesting that in some way the Messiah is God? Right? That's the question you're kind of left with here. That all the peoples, nations, and men of every tongue might serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which will not be taken away. And his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed. Alright, so what do we see about this kingdom?
It doesn't end.
It is not ending. And so I would argue that this is super comforting for Daniel because it turns out that in the end, God will triumph. In this Messiah figure, he will rule, he will reign, and God will fulfill his promises that he made to David. So what do y'all think about this verse?
Pretty cool.
It is pretty cool,
Pretty good.
right?
Good news.
So fast forward a few hundred years. This is where I'm going to bring in some New Testament stuff.
Some might even say it's a gospel.
Yeah, right? Yeah, it's good news. Yeah, gospel.
Mm-hmm.
Fast forward a few hundred years, and this guy named Jesus shows up on the scene. Guess what Jesus' favorite title for himself was?
Son of Man.
Son of Man. which I would
It's
argue
also Ezekiel's favorite title for himself.
it is, and that's actually that's worth highlighting, right? Because whenever you hear the phrase "Son of Man," what does that mean at its base meaning?
Human.
Yeah.
Human, right? So Ezekiel is called a son of man. He's writing around the same time as Daniel, and Ezekiel is not God in the flesh. So a few hundred years later, Jesus shows up, and he keeps referring to himself as the Son of Man. And I would argue that that is intentionally ambiguous, but it immediately raises questions because he keeps saying, "Oh yeah, the Son of Man came not to, not to be served, but to serve, to give his life as a ransom for many." And everybody's like, "Why do you keep calling yourself the Son of Man?" Because the question becomes, what are you calling yourself?
It's like, are you
Yes.
calling yourself that in the Ezekiel sense, or like
Or the Daniel sense.
Daniel sense?
Yeah, it's like you're very clearly calling yourself something. If you're calling yourself in the Ezekiel sense, you could be calling yourself a prophet, or you could just be calling yourself a dude. Okay? If you're calling yourself that in the Daniel sense, at the very least you're calling yourself Messiah, but it would also seem to imply that you're calling yourself more than that. So like there's like four interpretations.
And then they picked up stones.
Yeah. So it's like, are you claiming to be a man? Are you claiming to be a prophet? Are you claiming to be the Messiah? Or are you claiming to be God? Right? Like, there's all these different, these interpretations that are open here. And I would argue that Jesus does that intentionally. Right? If Jesus showed up and said, "Hey guys, I'm the Messiah," well, right, people would have had a very mixed, very quickly people would have had to make a choice. Right? Some people would have put armor on him and said, "Let's go to war," and he would have been killed overnight by the Romans.
Mm-hmm.
By contrast, on the other end, there would be a lot of people who would just push back on him and they just wouldn't like him anyways, and he would have also died. Right? So whenever you look at Jesus, he's constantly telling people to keep quiet about his messianic identity. And I would argue that's why he calls himself Son of Man, because it's so ambiguous that nobody knows what he's saying.
I do kind of like the fact that if you're looking from Ezekiel, the lens of Ezekiel always referring to himself as a son of man, a lot of the times when he mentions that, it's when God's calling to him.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like God is saying to Ezekiel, like, "Hey dude, I need you to do something."
Yeah. That's kind of funny. Yeah. Hey, dude.
Hey, dude.
But yeah, so I would argue that Jesus intentionally uses that phrase to confuse people and to keep people guessing about who he is. I mean, think about Matthew chapter 16. He turns to his disciples and says, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" So he literally asks them, like, "Hey, I keep using this title. What are people's best guesses?" And then he says, "Who do you say I am?" And they say, "You're the Christ, the Son of the living God." He says, "Blessed are you, flesh and blood has not revealed this to you." And so the entire time you look at Jesus' ministry, you're wondering, how is he using the term? And do you know what moment it is when you get to learn how he's using it?
Is it on the cross? Or at the
Whenever he
transfiguration?
says that the Son of Man has the authority to forgive sins.
Nope, it's actually on trial.
Oh, okay.
Jesus is going to quote this verse right here,
Yes.
and that is going to be the reason why he's killed. I'm going to read you the passage real quick. Because I love this, and it's something that people miss a lot because they don't know this passage. So, Jesus is, he's been betrayed, right? This is actually relevant because it's Passion Week right now,
Mhm.
right? And so these are the things we're celebrating over the next few days. So on Thursday night, after celebrating Last Supper, Jesus prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane. He's betrayed by Judas Iscariot. He's arrested, and he's taken he's taken to the house of the high priest Caiaphas, where he is held on trial. It's very illegal. Typically, you're not allowed to just take somebody to your house and hold a trial there in the middle of the night. Very illegal. And this is what we read. "Now the chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin kept trying to obtain false testimony against Jesus, so that they might put him to death. And they did not find any, even though many false witnesses came forward. But later on, two came forward and said, 'This man stated, I am able to destroy the sanctuary of God and rebuild it in 3 days.' And the high priest stood up and said to him, 'Do you not answer? What are these men testifying against you?' And Jesus kept silent." And so all these people are raising accusations against Jesus, but even the people offering false testimony can't get their story straight. And so the best thing they can do is take some of Jesus' words out of context, and the high priest says, "Well, what do you say about this?" And Jesus just refuses to answer. And so what they're going to do is they're going to say, "Well, we're going to see if we can get him to incriminate himself." And so the high priest said to him, "I put you under oath by the living God, that you tell us whether you are the Christ, the Son of God." And so he puts him under oath, and this is where Jesus is put in a catch-22, right? At this point, now that he is under oath by the high priest, if he doesn't respond, he is guilty of disobeying the authorities above him, right? And so he no longer has the option of being silent, right? If he stays silent, he's doing something wrong. So if he responds, he needs to make sure that it counts. And I love this. They say, "Are you the Christ, the Son of the living God?" And keep in mind, the phrase Son of God isn't inherently a divine claim, right? When you go back to God's covenant to David, he said, "I will be a father to your sons." And so the phrase Son of God could also be ambiguous. At the very least, it's claiming to be the Messiah, but it could be claiming more. What is not ambiguous is this verse in particular right here, right? Because right here, you've got a person riding the clouds, and he is definitely presented as being God, right? It's a very confusing verse. And so, he says, "I adjure you, are you the Christ, the Son of God? And Jesus is going to say, "You bet your boots I am." He says, "Actually, I'll one-up you." Jesus said to him, "You yourself said it. Nevertheless, I tell you, hereafter you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." Then the high priest tore his garments and said, "He has blasphemed. What further need do we have of witnesses? Behold, you have heard the blasphemy. What do you think?" They answered and said, "He deserves death." Then they spat on his face and beat him with their fists, and others slapped him and said, "Prophesy to us, O Christ, who is the one who hit you?" And so that's the reason why Jesus is going to be condemned, right? It's because they ask him, "Are you the Messiah?" And he says, I'll do you one better. Not only am I the Messiah, I'm the Son of Man. And next time you see me, I'm going to be riding on the clouds of heaven. Now, in the context of Daniel, whenever the Son of Man is riding on the clouds of heaven, what is he doing? Where is he going?
Into the presence of God.
He's going into the presence of God to receive what?
A kingdom. Everlasting kingdom.
An everlasting dominion, so that he can come back and judge the rulers of the world.
Yeah.
So here he is on trial before the high priest, and the high priest is trying to condemn him. And how does Jesus respond? "Yeah, I'm the Messiah. In fact, I'm God in the flesh. And next time you see me, I'm going to be the one judging you." So basically he says, let me be clear here. I'm not the one on trial right now. You are. And when I return, it's not going to end well for you. And so this is what causes the high priest to rip his garments and say, "Blasphemy." And so Jesus quoting this verse in particular is going to be the thing that condemns him to
Did he
death.
tear his garments in anger? Usually you do that in grief.
Well, it's because he's grieved that God has been blasphemed in his eyes.
Oh.
But actually, what's interesting is that it was illegal for a high priest to rip his garments, and so he breaks the Torah in doing that. But it shows the strength of his grief in that moment. So this verse is really cool because it is the reason why Jesus is going to die, and he intentionally quotes it. Like it's such a beautiful moment in the Gospels because he intentionally quotes it to fully identify himself in the most explicit manner possible. But in doing that, he ensures that he will be condemned to death. Does that make sense? Yeah. Like if he just said, "Yes, I'm the Messiah," they probably would have had to ask further questions to condemn him, right? The Romans don't want him claiming to be the Messiah, but all because he claimed to be the Messiah, Jewish people want the Messiah to show up. But he says, "You know what? If you're wanting to condemn me, I'll just give you the ammunition you need. Yeah. I am God in the flesh, standing before you, and I'm going to judge you one day." And the high priest is like, "Well, screw you, man!" Hand him over to death. And so, this is really cool. So yeah, he sees these four beasts, they're going to be destroyed, and then he sees the Son of Man figure showing up, eternal dominion, and then what I love about Daniel is he's still going to be caught up on the other stuff that he's seen. Daniel's like, "Okay, that's great, that's awesome, but can we go back to the fourth beast? What the heck was up with that?"
I don't like that it's still walking around. Please kill it.
Yeah. So, as for me, Daniel, my spirit was distressed within me, and the visions of my head kept alarming me. I kept near to one of those who were standing by and began seeking out from him the exact meaning of all this. So he said to me and made known to me the interpretation of these things. These great beasts, which are 4 in number, are 4 kings who will arise from the earth. But the saints of the highest one will receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever for all ages to come. So what is the interpretation that the messenger gives him?
That the beasts are kings, but that those who, each of the beasts represents one king, as opposed to like one kingdom, but like, and then the saints, receive the kingdom.
Well, that's what's so interesting, right? This is where I think the explanation, it actually reinforces the dual interpretation we've been talking about king and kingdom being tied together.
Yeah.
Because it says that the 4 beasts represent 4 kings, not kingdoms, but it doesn't say that the Son of Man represents a king. It says that the Son of Man represents the saints. And who would the saints be?
Like the believers.
Holy ones, like they're the ones who are part of the Messianic kingdom. And so I would actually argue that this is reinforcing the idea that there's this dual understanding, right? The 4 beasts represent both 4 kings and 4 kingdoms. And then the Son of Man riding on the clouds, on one hand, that does represent the Messiah. But on the other hand, it actually represents all those who belong to the Messiah's kingdom, which is actually kind of cool. And this actually reinforces stuff you're going to read in the New Testament, where not only is Jesus riding on the clouds, but it also talks about, the saints being caught up in the air to meet him in the clouds, right? And then they welcome him back into his kingdom. So you kind of got this like dual information here, to where you've got the Babylonian Empire, the Medo-Persian Empire, the Greek Empire, the Roman Empire, and then after all of this, the Messianic kingdom. And this is actually going to explain why, whenever you get to the New Testament, there's such a messianic fever at that time. Because the Jewish people have been studying the book of Daniel for hundreds of years. And as we're going to see, there are some prophecies later on in Daniel which very specifically say when the Messiah is going to show up. And so they're looking at this and they're like, okay, the Messiah is going to show up any day now. And they know when he's going to show up, but then he doesn't look how they expect. And instead of saying, hey guys, and patting them on the shoulders and saying, y'all are doing a great job, he says, what the heck? Y'all suck. What are y'all doing? And so they're not going to like that very much, and that's why they're going to reject him. And so ultimately, the messenger explains, the saints will receive the kingdom, which is cool, right? So it's not just the Messiah reigning, but his people are going to reign with him over the rest of the world, which is the same portrait we get in Revelation. All right. Verse 19. Then I desired to know. I freaking love Daniel. He can't get over the 4th beast. Like, he's like, okay, that's really cool. I understand what you're saying, but what's with the 4th beast? Then I desired to know the exact meaning of the 4th beast, which was different than all the others. Extraordinarily fearsome, with its teeth of iron and its claws of bronze, and which devoured, crushed, and trampled down the remainder with its feet. And the meaning of the 10 horns that were on its head, and the other horn which came up, and before which 3 of them fell, namely, that horn which had eyes and a mouth speaking great boasts, and which was larger in appearance than its associates. That's also interesting, because it says it was a little horn, but it's larger than its associates. Like,
I guess it grew.
yeah, it started off small, but it got really big. I kept looking, and that horn was waging war with the saints and overcoming them, until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was given in favor of the saints of the highest one. And the season arrived when the saints took possession of the kingdom. All right. So, what's going on here?
The horn gets big and starts persecuting the saints.
Yes. I love Daniel so much. He's like, God, this is great. I am so enthusiastic about the fact that you're going to rule and reign forever. I am so glad you got this all figured out. That is very encouraging to me. But the beast, what is that? Like, what's going on there? It's weird. I don't even know. What is that thing?
What is that thing?
It's like, I fear no man, but that thing.
Yes, like,
scares me.
I don't even know how to describe it. It's not a lion, it's not a tiger, it's not a bear. It's like, what is it? And he's just very confused. But it really does sound terrifying, right? To where I don't, like, we're kind of joking about it, but...
Yeah, I wouldn't be in any better of a
It's like
condition
he
if I
saw
saw
a
something like that.
Demogorgon from Stranger Things.
Yeah, it's like, it almost is like he saw something like that, or a dragon or something where it's like,
Yeah.
what the heck? It's like, okay, I at least had words to describe the other thing. I do not know what that is. And so I desire to know the exact meaning of the 4th beast, which was different from all the others. It was extraordinarily fearsome, with its teeth of iron, its claws of bronze, and which devoured, crushed, and trampled the remainder with its feet.
Saw a dinosaur.
Yeah, it's just a T-Rex. And so he wants to know, he's like, okay, thank you for explaining the general premise of the dream, but let me clarify what I really need to know. What's up with the fourth beast? What's the deal with the 10 horns that were on its head and the other horn which came up and before which 3 of them fell? Namely, that horn which had eyes and a mouth speaking great boasts and which was larger in appearance than his associates. So let me just ask, because we haven't really theorized about this much, what does it seem like he is describing here? So we have reason to believe he's talking about the Roman Empire, but what do the horns do? Like, what do they seem to represent?
Rulers.
Probably rulers of some sort, right? So, in general, the beast as a whole represents the kingdom, and then the horns would seem to represent rulers of the kingdom. Were you gonna say something?
I was gonna say like governors.
Okay, yeah. So some sort of leadership, and so you've got 10 leaders, and then 3 of the leaders are gonna fall, but in place of those 3 leaders, 1 leader rises up, and this leader, he's waging war with the saints. Whenever what does the word saint mean? Like, this is kind of a loaded term that we throw around all the time nowadays. But what does it actually mean at its most basic sense?
A devoted follower of God.
Yes. Let's see if I can get y'all to do some etymology. What is the Holy Bible called in Spanish?
I should know this.
Well, so does saint just mean holy?
Yes, yeah, because Santa Biblia, right? Santa Biblia, Holy Bible. Santa just means holy, right? So a saint is a holy one.
Technically.
Yes. Yeah. So Holy Bible just means the set apart book, like, because holy just means set apart.
Yeah.
And so whenever we say like saint, it just means holy one, right? And so like whenever you have like Santa Claus, it's Saint Claus. It's the set apart Claus.
Yeah.
And so it's saying that he's waging war with the holy ones and overcoming them. Whenever we think of saints as Christians, we immediately think of, like, specifically Christians. But keep in mind, Daniel does not have that terminology at his time, right? When he thinks saints, he is thinking of devoted, like Jews who are devoted to the Messiah and devoted to the one true God, right? We would call those Christians. But at the very least, we can say that whoever this final beast is, like this final empire, which we would argue is probably the Roman Empire, they are in some way waging war against the followers of the Messiah, right? Or the ones who are devoted to the one true God. And it's overcoming them. What? Why are you looking at me like that? You did like this very slow head swivel. It kind of freaked me out.
I have historical precedent for that.
Okay, explain it.
So obviously the Romans were the ones who crucified Jesus, but they were also, the Jewish people in Jesus' time were the ones who started the persecution against the early Christians. But when Nero started persecuting the Christians throughout the entire Roman Empire is when it really reached its fever pitch. And as the Roman Empire continued, the persecution of the Christians continued as well, to where even with the latter emperors like Aurelius and Diocletian, they were still heavily persecuting Christians and stuff, until this guy named Constantine comes around and he converts to Christianity on his deathbed, and then his successor Gratian, I think his successor was Gratian, one of the emperors who comes after him establishes Christianity as the official religion of the empire, and it spreads like wildfire. Mm-hmm. And basically, when the fall of the Roman Empire happens, 50% of it was Christian at that point.
Yeah. But so there is a precedent of Romans persecuting not only Christians but also Jews.
Yes.
Right? So that's something that we often kind of miss. As Christians, we always talk about how, Romans persecuted Christians. Well,
though historically the persecution of Jews was less so than the persecution of Christians, because the Romans, even though they didn't like the Jews for being monotheistic, they respected them for being an ancient religion.
At times.
Christianity, yeah. But
there were times where it rose to a fever pitch to where, in many ways, the Jews experienced persecution even before the Christians did, mainly because the Christians were a small movement. It took some time. To where, and for a while, Christianity and Judaism, keep in mind, they were not like whenever we think of them nowadays, we think of them as very distinct things. They were not, like, it took a while for that distinction to be ironed out, right? For the early decades and stuff, whenever the Rome was still at the height of its power, really Christianity was just viewed as a sect of Judaism, right? And it's not until you get like a few centuries later where they're really being identified as separate things. Even during the time of Nero and stuff, there is a distinction. But yeah, so it would seem to suggest that this is what Daniel might have in mind, in which case we might actually have evidence for what he has, like, what he's talking about here. If we're talking about 10 rulers, Nick and I were talking about this earlier, but typically whenever we think of the Roman Empire, the person that we think of as like being the first emperor is Caesar Augustus, right? However, whenever we think of the first Caesar, that would be Julius Caesar, right? In which case, if you actually look from Julius Caesar until the time period when the temple fell in AD 70, there were 10 rulers over the Roman Empire, right? So there was Julius Caesar, there was Augustus, there was Tiberius, there was Caligula, there was Claudius, there was Nero, there was Galba, there was Otho, there was Vitellius, and then there was Vespasian. And Jerusalem fell during the reign of Vespasian, and that was the 10th ruler. I'm not going to say that's the clear answer here, because that doesn't solve the whole problem, right? It does not explain the 3 horns that fall and the 1 horn that rises from it. But this is where some people would argue that this last horn was not actually during that time period. And so there are many people who would argue that this last horn is actually a future ruler that would come at the very end, who we would describe as like the Antichrist. And that's mainly because he's described as being like the fiercest of all the, to where he's somehow part of this beast, but he's also very different, and he's more vicious than ever before. And that would seem to line up with other things that you do see in like the New Testament, whenever Paul talks about the man of lawlessness and stuff like that. I ultimately don't know. I'm not going to claim that like that is the correct interpretation. That is one of the most dominant ones. And whenever we get to Daniel chapter 9, there might be evidence to support that, because Daniel's going to describe these 70 weeks of years, so basically 490 years, and the 69th week, it culminates with Jerusalem being destroyed. And then it really doesn't explain exactly what's going on with the 70th week. And so that's where some people arrive at the idea that there's still 7 years left over, which would be for the end. But we'll get to that when we get to chapter 9. But I'm just going to be honest with you. I have no idea what's fully going on here. We're really just trying to like fit things together. And again, I don't want to get too speculative, but I understand. Let's just say I understand why Daniel's so troubled, because keep in mind that he's seeing these things 400 years ahead of time. Right? This is like us seeing things that were happening in 2426. That would very much confuse us, right? We'd be like, whoa, like, I don't even know what's going to happen tomorrow, much less 400 years from now.
Yeah.
Daniel is seeing these things, and he's troubled by it. And here we are, thousands of years later, and we're still like, yeah, I got no idea. And so it kind of reinforces the idea that Daniel probably was really something special. But in the end, you've got this little horn who's rising up out of the beast, and he wages war against the saints, and he overcomes them. The language of overcoming, where's that going to pop up again?
Revelation.
It's going to show up in Revelation, but also just throughout the New Testament, right? Whenever you go to the book of Romans, Paul says that we are more than overcomers in Christ Jesus, and people love to like take that verse out and like plaster it on their walls. Unfortunately, they very rarely actually like examine the context behind that verse. Let me just actually go show it to you real quick, because I think the context is fun. It's Romans chapter 8. So the verse is where it says, but in all these things we overwhelmingly conquer through him who loved us, right? So the word for conquer there, sometimes they'll say we are more than conquerors, or it'll say we are overcomers, right? So it's the same language, like this is in Greek, but let me go a few verses earlier, because people love saying, oh, we're more than conquerors in Christ Jesus. Let's go a few verses earlier. Who will separate us from the love of Christ? Will affliction, or turmoil, or persecution, or famine, or nakedness, or peril, or sword? So what is Paul describing?
Trouble.
Persecution, right? Hardship, right? Hardship like, he's saying that hardship will not separate you from the love of Christ. And then he says, just as it is written, for your sake we are being put to death all day long. We are counted as sheep for the slaughter. So he quotes an Old Testament verse and says, the scripture prophesied that we would be persecuted unto death. And then he says, but in all these things we overwhelmingly conquer through him who loved us. And so, in the context of Romans, the idea of conquering and overcoming, it's the notion of being faithful unto death. The way that you overcome evil is by not succumbing to it. You suffer unto death and keep your eyes on Jesus. And so the idea of overcoming is being faithful unto death. And whenever you get to Revelation, it's the same exact thing. Right? Whenever you get to the letters to the 7 churches in Revelation chapters 2 and 3, every single one of them offers a promise to those who overcome. Right? So, Revelation chapter 2, it says, he who has an ear to hear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. To him who overcomes, I will grant to eat the tree of life, which is in the paradise of God. He who has an ear to hear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. He who overcomes will never be hurt by the second death. He who has an ear to hear, let him hear what the Spirit says. To him who overcomes, to him I will give some of the hidden manna, and I will give him a white stone. And if you actually read the context in those letters, what John is continually telling them to do is be faithful unto death. And so the way that you overcome is by being faithful unto death and being persecuted unto martyrdom. But then ironically, whenever you also read the Revelation, it says that the dragon and the beast are overcoming the saints. And so the irony is that they're both overcoming one another, right? The beast is overcoming the saints by putting them to death, but the saints are overcoming the beast by allowing themselves to be put to death, if that makes sense, right? And they're not buckling in their faith. Instead, they're being faithful to God even at the cost of their lives. And I would argue that's probably the same imagery going on here in verse 22, or verse 21. I kept looking, and the horn was waging war with the saints and overcoming them, right? So it looks like the horn is winning, right? This beast figure, the horn, he is winning by beating them. But then, notice what happens afterwards. Until the Ancient of Days came and judgment was given in favor of the saints of the highest one, and the season arrived when the saints took possession of the kingdom. That's interesting, because it looks like the saints got killed in verse 21, but in verse 22 they're being given a kingdom. How does that work?
Very much like Revelation.
Well, it would suggest the notion of eternal life.
Yes.
And one thing that we haven't really highlighted a lot, but have you noticed that the Old Testament doesn't talk a lot about eternal life? Like, that's something that we take for granted as Christians. Because the New Testament talks about resurrection and eternal life a lot. The Old Testament barely mentions it. You know what book very clearly mentions eternal life? Daniel, right? And we're going to see that over the course of these next few visions. And so this is like the earliest hint of it, to where you've got these saints who are being overcome, but even after they're overcome unto death, they're going to be given a kingdom afterwards. And that would align with Revelation, right? It's whenever you look at Revelation, the book opens up in chapter 1, and there's these elders sitting on the throne. But then they get off the throne, and they bow down, and they take their crowns off and cast them before God. And whenever you go to the end of Revelation, it's now the martyrs who are sitting on the throne. Right? And so the ones who become heirs in the kingdom, they're the ones who are faithful unto death. And so that's just interesting to me. To where God, like, he will reward those who are faithful, like who suffer martyrdom. Verse 23. So Daniel just asked, I need this thing explained. Can you please tell me? Thus he said, the fourth beast will be a fourth kingdom on the earth, which will be different from all the other kingdoms, and will devour the whole earth, and tread it down, and crush it. As for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom 10 kings will arise, and another will arise after them, and he will be different from the previous ones, and will make low 3 kings. He will speak words against the Most High, and wear down the saints of the Highest One, and he will intend to make changes in seasons and in law, and they will be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. But the court will sit for judgment, and his dominion will be taken away, annihilated, and destroyed forever. Then the reign, the dominion, and the greatness of all the kingdoms under the whole heaven will be given to the people of the saints of the Highest One. His kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all the dominions will serve and obey him. All right. So there's the explanation. What does he say?
Reads a lot like Revelation.
It
He
does.
essentially says, the fourth kingdom is going to come, which is essentially the Roman Empire, and crush everything, which is essentially the known world at the time, right? I would assume the Roman Empire is going to not crush the whole world literally, but the known ancient world at the time. And then, so there's going to be 10 horns, which probably represent rulers.
Well, it clearly does because
Yeah.
it says 10 kings. Yeah.
10 kings, I meant to say rulers of the Roman Empire. And then there's going to be, and then I would argue the 3 that fall and the 1 that rises might be referencing something in Revelation, especially the last one, probably a reference to the Antichrist.
Yeah. And so there's a lot of just interesting things going on here to where I guess it's wrong to say that Daniel sounds like Revelation. It's more appropriate to say Revelation sounds like Daniel, right? Because it's not that Revelation is... Like, this is what I'm saying whenever I say Revelation does not really introduce any new information. Revelation just recontextualizes old information, right? So everything that Revelation says is calling upon previous stuff, and if John ever introduces something new, he explains it, right? And so really he's just linking all this stuff together. But yeah, so he says that the fourth beast will be a fourth kingdom on the earth, and that much we already figured out, right? It will be different from all the other kingdoms and will devour the whole earth and tread it down and crush it. And that does seem to describe the Roman Empire. At the very end, I will describe another interpretation that people have. I don't know where to land with it, but then it says, as for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom 10 kings will arise. I'm assuming that these are not 10 kings at the same time, but it's 10 successive kings that it's talking about. In which case, you could argue that maybe it is like the 10, like the Caesars of like the starting with Julius Caesar and then the Julian Claudian dynasty, and then like eventually leading to Vespasian and stuff. I don't know. And then another will arise after them, and it says that he will be different from the previous ones, and he will make low 3 kings. And this verse in particular is the one that really throws people off because it seems like he belongs to the same empire, but somehow he is not like any of the other ones. And this is what leads some people to think, okay, well maybe this is like an Antichrist-like figure who shows up way later on. Just because if it is talking about Rome, it's like honestly, it's really hard to nail down what it's talking about.
Well, it's confusing too, because right, it's also said that Babylon will rise again, and we would associate.
What are you talking about?
In times.
Well, where does it say that Babylon will rise again?
Revelation.
Okay, we're not talking about Revelation right now. We're talking about Daniel, right?
Okay.
Like right now, I want us to act as if Revelation does not exist, because if we read Revelation into it, it's going to kind of confuse us a little bit. For right now, we're just trying to understand Daniel. Because even in Revelation, I think that when it says, like, I think Babylon is actually more of a reference to Jerusalem. I think it's like he's insulting Jerusalem by calling them that. But for right now, we're just trying to make sense of the text itself, if that makes sense, right? Because Revelation might be commenting on it, but we're never going to understand what Revelation is saying about this unless we understand this first. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. And so, if it is talking about the Roman Empire, which is our guess right now, it really is hard to nail down exactly what it has in mind. And so, I really can't say. All we can say is, okay, there's 10 kings, and then eventually 3 kings are going to be made low, but it doesn't necessarily say that... It doesn't say he will make low 3 of the kings that were part of the 10, right? Even though in the vision, there were 10 horns and 3 of them went down, in the explanation, he does not say that the 3 that go down are like... You see what I'm saying there?
Yeah.
It's like... So, there is an allowance for the possibility of there being a separation here, which could explain, like, if you're going with the 10 kings basically being the leaders of the Roman Empire culminating in the destruction of Jerusalem. And then maybe there is a break that allows for the other stuff. I don't know. And stuff like this does happen in the prophets a lot, right? There's stuff that Isaiah will say where he's talking about the Messiah, and half the verse will be talking about the first time Jesus showed up, and the next half of the verse is talking about his return, and there's nothing that Isaiah says that indicates that time passed. And so that is a possibility. I honestly don't know. But what we can say is more about who this horn will be, right? So we don't know when this is going to be. We don't know how it's going to be, but we do know that he will speak words against the Most High. What does that mean?
God.
Yeah, so he's going to be blasphemous, right? He's going to talk against God. And he is going to wear down the saints of the highest one. And so he's going to talk against God, and what's he going to do?
Persecute the saints.
Yeah, persecute God's people, right? So he talks against God, he persecutes God's people, and they will be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. What is that a reference to?
Unknown measurements of time.
It's an unknown measurement of time, but earlier, like, what did we kind of come to the conclusion whenever we were talking about, like, Nebuchadnezzar going crazy? Because remember it said that for 7 periods of time he would be crazy?
It's like 7 years.
Yeah, it seems like it was 7 years. Mainly because if he was gone for, like, if it was only 7 months, his hair would not have been like eagle's wings and his, like, nails like bird's claw, right? So, but if it was 7 decades, that would be, he'd be dead. And so 7 years, like, it seems like whenever Daniel talks about periods of time or time, it's talking about years. And so time, times, and half a time, what would that be? So
5 years.
So what is time? Like 1 year. What would be times?
Multiple years or 2.
2 years.
At least 2.
And then half a time?
Half a year.
So
Half a year. 3.5 years. Right? And so it would seem to suggest that the saints will be given into this person's hand for 3.5 years. And this is where it also gets interesting, because I do believe that the destruction of Jerusalem took 3.5 years.
Mm-hmm.
But even then, I don't. Like, this could be one of those places where there is a short-term and long-term fulfillment, because I don't think anybody would argue that after the destruction of Jerusalem, the Messianic kingdom was firmly established. You know what I mean? Like, because, I mean, right now we're 2,000 years after that, and things are still pretty bad. And so it could be that was a short-term fulfillment, but there is going to be this long-term Antichrist figure who does have, at minimum, 3.5 years of prominent power. And that actually would line up with Revelation. There are some people who do argue that Revelation was fulfilled at the destruction of Jerusalem as well, but I think that's usually a pretty weak argument, but we'll get that in a few years. But the court will sit for judgment. What court is it referring to?
The people gathered around the throne.
Yeah, so this is the one we saw earlier, whenever the Ancient of Days was sitting on his throne and there was a court sitting on the other thrones, right? So the court will sit in judgment, and his dominion will be taken away, right? So the Elohim will judge this horn, and they will take his dominion away just like they took away the dominion of the other beasts. And the greatness of all the kingdoms under... His dominion will be taken away, annihilated, and destroyed forever. And so he will be put to an end. And this does seem to suggest a final culminating end. You know what I mean? Like, this seems to be the end of, like, rebellious powers, which would suggest to me a more eschatological, like, end times thing. Then the reign, the dominion, and the greatness of all the kingdoms under the whole heaven will be given given to the people of the saints of the highest one. And so the dominion is taken from him and given to who?
The saints.
The saints, specifically the saints of who?
The highest one.
God.
The highest one, which we interpret to be God, right? Because that's what we saw back in, like, verse 25, like, to where the highest one we would assume to be God, but then it says, his kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions will serve and obey him. But earlier in this chapter, who was it who had an everlasting dominion and a kingdom that had no end?
The Son of Man who rides on the clouds.
The Son of Man who rides on the clouds and received it from the Ancient of Days. And so it's like, wait a second, who is the highest one here? Is it God, or is it the Son of Man? And to this, we say,
Yes.
yes. Exactly. Right? And so, my whole thing here is that it seems like Daniel is like in the vision, it is intentionally blurring the relationship between what we as Christians would call the Father and the Son. Right? Daniel is not using those terms, but that seems to be what's happening here, right? And John seems to do that as well. Whenever you get to Revelation, you'll have the Father saying, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. And then later on, you'll have Jesus say, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. And you're like, wait a second. But the Father said that. And Jesus says, yes. But you're the Son. Yes. And like the idea is that, like, this is how we arrive at the doctrine of the Trinity, to where they are distinct persons, but they are somehow one. right? Like that's how we arrive there, because the text of Scripture forces you into that, because there's like this idea where the Son of Man is distinct from the Ancient of Days, but somehow he's not, right? To where somehow he's man, but he's also God, and he also approaches God, but he's also described in the same way as God, and he receives from God, and only God can have. You see what I mean? Like, this is what forces us into the Trinity, to where in the Old Testament I would argue that you could almost arrive at like, not a Trinity, but like I guess like a binity, like at least the Father and the Son, a duality.
Yeah.
But then once you get to the New Testament, the Holy Spirit is also clarified into there as well. And so there's the explanation. This leads us to the final verse. At this point, the matter of this revelation ended. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts were greatly alarming me, and the splendor of my face changed, but I kept the matter in my heart. So, how does Daniel respond to this whole thing?
Almost traumatized, it seems.
Yeah, he's like, that was wild.
Yeah.
Don't know how I'll be able to handle that either.
It's interesting because the next week we'll go into how Daniel was even more troubled by the vision that he has.
Yeah.
To the point where he's like physically ill.
Yeah, being a prophet
Ooh, wow.
sounds terrifying, honestly. He's just like, oh my gosh, like, this is scary. And this is kind of like, I think some of us are kind of tempted to like look at this and be like, well, Daniel, this should be encouraging, right? God's going to rule and reign forever. But keep in mind,
There's a lot of violence that happens in between.
well, yeah, like we're saying that after the majority of that stuff has already occurred,
Yeah.
right? Like this is us, like, oh yeah, like the Roman Empire stuff, that's like way in the past for us. Whereas Daniel was at like before all this, right? He sees that his people are going to be suffering for a long time, and it's going to be a while before the Messiah even shows up. And like for us, we would argue that whenever we look forward to like the future, like in days, we would say that really there's all that's left is basically like 3.5, maybe 7 years max of just like horrible stuff, right? Whenever you actually look at what the Bible says. And so it really isn't that bad. Daniel's looking at like 400 years of just bad thing after bad thing after bad thing. So you can kind of understand why he'd be terrified. But earlier, Nick had said that we're going to have a tough time finding application out of this chapter. And so I would like to challenge that here at the end. What are some application things that we could take away from this? Like, did God give this vision to Daniel just to freak him out? Or just to give us a really cool chapter about predictive prophecy?
No, he also gave it as like a sign that, as long as you were faithful even unto bodily death, you will receive, an everlasting kingdom. Basically.
Yeah, on that note, this is another reason why, it's really common in, especially in Bible Belt evangelical circles such as ourselves, the predominant view when it comes to the end times is the notion of like the pre-tribulation rapture, the idea that God will take us away before everything gets bad.
Yeah.
And usually the biggest argument that people use about like to defend it is they say, well, Jesus would not allow, or the Father would not allow his the Son's bride to be beaten up before she was presented to Jesus. The idea that God would not allow his people to suffer. And I kind of push back against that because I don't see evidence for that in Scripture. To where, if people hold that, that's fine. Most of the people at our church would hold the pre-tribulation rapture. But to me, when I look at Scripture, the Bible has a radically different perspective of what suffering entails, right? To where suffering is not supposed to be, it's not God allowing the bride of Christ to be beat up. If anything, it's him allowing the bride of Christ to be refined through suffering, right? It's like being refined through fire and being beautified. And also, I think that perspective is usually a fairly arrogant one because, sure, over here in America, we've got it pretty easy, but there are plenty of Christians throughout the world who are suffering right now. And so, to argue that God would not allow his people to suffer is to be ignorant of what the earliest Christians went through, but it's also ignorant of what a lot of people are going through even now. And so, whenever you look at Daniel here, in his visions, he sees the saints suffering. And not only suffering, they're being conquered. And the implication would be that they are dying for their faith. But even in the midst of all of that, like Nick was kind of pointing out, God's still in control. All right, and so all because there is suffering and all because you might even die for your faith does not mean that God's out of control. And so I think that application-wise, that should be comforting, and it should actually encourage you to just go and live for Him, because the idea is like, yeah, what can they do? Take your life? Cool. What other?
Just give it right back.
Yeah, exactly. If anything, like there's a reward for it, right? It's like, congratulations, you were martyred. Awesome. What other applications can we take out of this? Again, why do you think God gave this vision to Daniel? Just because He wanted Daniel to have PTSD and never sleep again?
He was like maybe trying to show Daniel that things are going to get worse before they get better.
Okay, so he's helping him discern the times, right? Like, it just helps him understand, hey, just have a realistic outlook on life. Things are not going to get better for a while. It's going to get worse and worse and worse. So it kind of it prevents him from foolishly thinking, hey, things are going to be magically better if we could just get out of Babylon.
Yeah, it's almost like he's telling him, like, hey, I know that I said the exile in Babylon would end after 7 years, but it's not actually going to, like, fully end.
Yeah, and that's going to be clarified again when we get to chapter 9 as well. But even beyond that, what is that pop-up? Oh, okay, that's fine. Even beyond all of that stuff, I would argue that this just shows how much control God has over history. Right? I mean, for instance, if you were to ask me exactly how tomorrow is going to go, I have zero idea. I mean, I've got plans, but pretty much anytime I make plans, things do not go according to plan.
Yeah.
And so I cannot even predict the next 24 hours. Yet here you have Daniel having a vision that stretches not years, but centuries into the future, to where even as historians, we can look and be like, wow, that is exactly what happened. And then whenever historians push back and say, oh, it must have been written later, well, then the archaeology is like, well, no, this was written pretty early. And so to me, it just suggests, no, this stuff is like, it really just shows that God is in control, and it reinforces the fact that, yes, kingdoms rise and kingdoms fall, but that is all being driven by the sovereign hand of God. Right? To where, yes, things will get worse, and yes, people will suffer, and yes, the saints will suffer and be martyred for their faith, but none of this misses God's sight. And in fact, He saw it from the beginning. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that it should terrify you a little bit, because it'll let you know, yeah, you're not guaranteed to have an easy life, and you're not guaranteed to make it out of this life without suffering. But it also should encourage you, because you realize, well, you know what? The Son of Man will sit enthroned. And actually, I would argue, so we typically associate the Son of Man riding on the clouds as Jesus returning to establish His kingdom. But technically, in the vision itself, what is the Son of Man doing?
Going to receive power first, like it's not instant, I guess.
Well, He's going to receive the authority for the kingdom. And I would actually argue that that has already happened. Right? When did that happen?
When Jesus resurrected.
So when He resurrected and He ascended.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, He says, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go and make disciples. I will be with you to the end of the age. Then what does He do? He ascends to the right hand of the Father. And so He rides the clouds to the Ancient of Days, and He receives glory, honor, and a kingdom. And then that's why when you get to Revelation, the opening vision that John has is of God sitting on His throne. And then he sees this lamb that looks like it has been slain. And it walks before like God sitting on the throne. And it receives a scroll from Him. And the scroll has 7 seals. And my interpretation would be that this scroll is like the deed to the kingdom. And then as He begins to open up the seals, things begin to fall upon the earth that eventually will result in the kingdom being established. And so I would argue that we're kind of like in the middle of this, to where the Son of Man has already rode on the clouds to the Ancient of Days, and He already has the kingdom. But one day He's going to come riding on the clouds back to us, and He's going to establish it. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And so we kind of find ourselves in the middle of this, to where I would argue that, yeah, we're probably waiting for that little horn to rise up. But we have no way of knowing who He is and stuff like that. But yeah, and so to me, I think that there's a lot of encouragement that we can take from this chapter, just because it reinforces the fact that, yeah, there's going to be some pretty messed up kingdoms out there, but also it teaches us don't put your trust in the governments of this world, right? Every government thinks that they've got it all together. The Babylonians thought they had it all together, and what happened to them?
Finished it.
Yeah, they were destroyed, right? They were taken out by the Persians, the Medes and the Persians,
They were
right?
not thrown from a window.
Yeah. But then the Medes and the Persians, they thought they had it all together. What happened to them?
They didn't.
They didn't, right? There came Alexander the Great. Haha, I've got it all together. Dies at 32. Kingdom split amongst 4 people. The Greeks, man, they had it all together. No, they're the Romans, right? And so every single empire and every government thinks that they have the answers, but they don't. If anything, they're getting further and further from the truth, right? And so the message here is don't place your hope in worldly government, right? You should serve them, right? I mean, that's what Daniel did, right? While he was in Babylon, he served Babylon and he prayed for them and he sought the best interest of the kingdom. But his hope was not in Babylon, right? When it came down to it, Babylon was a lion with eagle's wings that needed to be given a human heart. And it was actually through Daniel's prayer and stuff that he eventually did get that human heart. And so we should serve our nation and we should serve our country, but we should not place our hope in that country and in any way think that our country is going to be the solution to all the world's problems. It's not going to be. There's only one kingdom that's going to be the solution, and that's going to be Christ's kingdom. And so I think that like the application is it kind of sobers up our minds to figure out what is our role. Our role is to seek the best interest of our country, to serve the people around us, but also to place our hope in a kingdom yet to come. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Any other application points y'all can think of? I didn't mind going so much over today because we started pretty late. So, any other thing I can think of? I mentioned that there is an alternate theory in regards to this whole empire thing, right? So there's the Babylonian Empire, that'd be the first kingdom. Then there's the Medo-Persian Empire, which would be the second kingdom. Real quick, going back to this, why is there a red dot right there?
Is that where the capital was?
That's where Babylon is, and that's where Daniel is receiving the vision,
okay.
right? That's why this is significant. Because there's the Babylonian Empire, then there's the Medo-Persian Empire.
Oh, that's so huge.
Yeah, and then there's the Greek Empire, which is only slightly bigger. But then this is where we run into slightly an issue. Because this is the Roman Empire. It is true that for a short time period in I think it's 113, 114 AD, the Roman Empire did extend into Mesopotamia, but by and large it didn't. And so, while the predominant view of most scholars is that the Roman Empire is what is being described, there is a bit of an issue here. And what is the main issue?
It doesn't encapsulate Babylon.
Yeah, it doesn't encapsulate Babylon. If Daniel had received this vision while he was in Jerusalem, the problem would be solved, right? Because the Roman Empire did cover the land of Israel. But he didn't receive it there. And keep in mind that this vision is not written in Hebrew like the next visions are. It's written in Aramaic, which is the language of the Babylonian people. Which has led people to think, wait, what if it's not the Roman Empire at all? And what if we're getting this wrong? And so one alternate theory that some people have suggested is that it could be the Islamic Caliphate. I don't know if I entirely get behind that. Just because I would say you run into more issues because Islam didn't exist until several hundred years after Christ.
Yeah.
But it is true that, in general, Islamic people and Jewish people have not gotten along. And we have seen that for the last several thousand years. And so, in general, whenever people talk about an Antichrist figure rising up, the general, the two predominant theories is that he is going to be basically the leader of a revived Roman Empire, or he is going to be an Islamic Antichrist. And so those are typically the predominant theories. I probably still lean towards the Roman one because I think that that's the best supported by the text of Scripture, because when you get to the New Testament, the focus is on Rome. Islam did not exist. And so, I don't know. But there are certain things in Revelation which do, whenever it describes, the beast and his practices, it actually does sound very Islamic. And so, I really don't know. I did want to just highlight that to y'all. Here's the parallels between the beasts and the statue of Nebuchadnezzar. And then here's just other depictions people have made. There's so many funny ones online. These are the best ones I found, but there's some goofy ones that I just thought I'd show y'all.
I like the dinosaur interpretation.
Well, I love that they always make it a dragon or a dinosaur, which I just think is so funny.
Anything reptilian, really.
Yeah. Well, I think it's like they're just trying to think what could it had to be something that was so scary that Daniel couldn't help but describe it, or like that he couldn't describe it. I just would love if it was just like a platypus. It's just like it's just something that's just like
A giant platypus, I'd be freaked
Yeah.
out.
It was like
That was
a big snapping turtle.
yeah, it's just like something that's just like he's like I literally have no word for this. Like,